Have you ever thought about leaving your job because of stress? Because of the stress of the job? Have you ever thought about changing not only your job, but maybe even changing your career, your entire career path because of being overwhelmed, dissatisfied, and really feeling burnt out in your career? If that has crossed your mind, you're going to want to listen to this episode. My name is Aaron Shaw. I am the host of Healthspan Digest, and I am grateful that today we have a special guest that we're going to do a little digging into this concept of being overwhelmed and burnt out in our careers. And I think that for those of us that kind of have a little bit of kind of overachieving tendencies, sometimes overambitious, that we can kind of paint ourselves into a corner sometimes and find ourselves maybe even being our own worst enemy in this and kind of in a position where we are feeling overwhelmed. So we're going to unpack that with my guest, Dr. Amber Parks. But let me kind of set the stage a little bit here about this podcast. This podcast is Healthspan Digest, and I talk about the 5 pillars of Healthspan. These are exercise, nutrition, sleep, emotional well-being, and preventative care. And this topic it kind of blends in a lot of these pillars, but definitely emotional well-being, because we know that if we are under stress, under duress, that it has very real physiological impacts to our health. Everything from heart disease and stroke, blood pressure has a direct relationship to our emotional well-being. So we want to make sure that we are caring for ourselves, doing some self-care to help us live a long, healthy, vibrant life, which is the whole essence of Healthspan. And Dr. Amber Parks is going to help us relieve all the stresses that we've ever had at work. She's going to, no, she's not going to, not going to cure all things, but let me tell you a little bit about Amber. She is a veterinarian turned burned out and stress coach who knows firsthand what it feels like to be overwhelmed, exhausted, and stuck in a career that you once loved. After facing her own burnout, she now helps high-achieving professionals from around the world reclaim their energy, confidence, and joy without necessarily needing to quit their jobs or change careers. Dr. Parks is originally from Massachusetts and now based in somewhat humid Central Florida. She's passionate about guiding others towards a work-life balance through virtual coaching, and she specializes in helping clients overcome imposter syndrome and learning to say no without guilt, which I think would be a fun thing to kind of dig into a little bit, and build sustainable lives that feel fulfilling and not draining. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Yes.
Let's start off a little bit.
Opportunity.
Well, let's talk a little bit about maybe set the stage here on what we're talking about. The big picture is being burnt out, feeling burnt out. Can you talk us a little bit about like what that means and what that means to you?
Sure. Yeah, I do think burnout will look a little different for everyone, but for me, it actually encompasses all those pillars that you just talked about. Burnout is really that prolonged stress and overwhelm. And stress should be, in theory, just a small, short period of time. And then it's not stressful and life goes on. Like there's ebbs and flows. Burnout is just that constant going. Typically, we're in that fight or flight mode, if you will. Like there's just no turning off. And it usually starts in our work life, but then it really seeps into our personal life. And that's where things like nutrition, exercise, preventative care, all those things are absolutely affected by burnout. And the tricky part is it typically happens pretty slowly, so it's harder to recognize.
So maybe explain this a little bit more through your personal experience, because it sounds like you've gone through maybe the acute stresses, and then it accumulated in your career. So tell us a little bit about what got you to where you are today, like what you're doing today compared to when you were in practice.
Sure. Yeah, that you'll see, hindsight is always 2020. And so I started in 2009 working as an associate in small animal practice, general practice, and right out of school. It was something where now looking back, it's comical, like how much I gave my time, my energy, my sanity at times. So veterinary medicine is absolutely a, high stake, high stress type of environment. And it was something where, the margin of error, if you will, is minimal to none. And so we set the standard so high. And this is what I did for myself, that about 8 to 9 years into practice, I was really like, okay, I'm on this hamster wheel of stress. It's not slowing down, but now my capacity to either do anything outside of work, like actually have a life, is minimal to none. And in work, I, it was like just constant go, go, go. So I was getting resentful of coworkers that were asking me completely legitimate questions, and simple questions. And in my mind, I'm like, don't you know I'm doing 300 things at once right now? Like, can't you figure it out? That's not how it came out because I'm also a people pleaser, which we'll talk about. But it was almost not having that vent or output for it festered, that those feelings of stress. And so I found myself, going to work at, I don't know, 6:30 in the morning before we opened. I'd like eat breakfast at work all day, not take a lunch break, shove some sort of unhealthy food into my mouth in between doing things. And then maybe 7:30, hopefully go home. But most of the time I didn't. I was staying an hour or two after closing. Sometimes then I'd eat dinner at work. And so in my mind, I was being that really good doctor and being there for my patients and clients and being a great employee. But that was like my main focus, and everything else went by the wayside. So in doing that, I gained 50 plus pounds. I have still dealing with some actual chronic illnesses from that time period as well, because I just didn't know how to deal with stress. So for me, it got to a point where I was just like ready to run. Like, I'll do anything but go to work tomorrow. It was almost to the point of like, it sounds crazy, but like, I hope I get sick because then maybe I can take a day off. So if you're having those thoughts, like, that's not normal. And in the heat of the moment, it seemed like that was like, okay, you're just being a great employee and this is great for your career. So I had spoke with my boss and I said, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go into this other position, which hindsight, and we'll talk about, would have just been another train wreck, just in a different location. It would have been me as a train wreck. And so I ended up staying for a couple years in a different capacity, but ultimately I got burnt out again. And I was really doing stuff that I enjoyed because I was working with colleagues and we were talking about cases and a very collaborative approach, which I loved. But then the need for veterinarians crept in and I was kind of pulled to fill certain schedule holes, if you will. So I found myself back doing appointments, which were draining. And so I decided, well, if I'm going to do this, I'll do this on my own terms and do relief or locum work. So essentially, I'll be my own boss. I'll go to practices that need a doctor to fill in, and it'll be great. And so I did that. And to me, that was the cure for burnout. It was like, well, I make my own schedule. I practically name my own price. I work as much or as little as I want. And if I work at a hospital that maybe I don't really jive with the support staff or how they practice medicine, I just don't go back. So in theory, that would have been the ultimate perfect situation. And after doing that for a couple of years, I got burnt out again. And that's really when it hit me that it doesn't matter what environment I found myself in, I'm still the same person trying to process any sort of stress in the same way. And so I was the common denominator. And I realized I have to look at how I'm trying to process that stress in order for myself to really get out of burnout.
I want to kind of follow up on is you recognize that it was as much who you are and how you operate as much as it is I'm in this place, it's this job, it's this position. And then maybe the realization is when you change positions, you realize like, oh, now it's this place and this position and this thing. And then there's that moment where you look in the mirror and say, oh, maybe it's the person in the mirror that could develop some skills on how to navigate these things.
Yes.
Yes. So when looking back on your experience, and again, hindsight is 2020, so you get the little bit of grace here, but can you look back and see signals, or can you pick up on things that maybe you could have done things sooner than what you did? Like, would you recognize little signs now that maybe I'm thinking of a listener right now who's maybe teetering, or maybe there are some subtle signs that you could point them to and say, hey, be careful in this spot. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think kind of two avenues. One being in my personal life, I would, have a day off, and that day off wasn't restful at all. It was because I had overextended myself so much at work, my days off were, okay, I'm going to get up early, I'll clean the house, do laundry, do some errands. And so I'm already piling a bunch of things to do on my list. And what would happen is either I'm so tired that it doesn't happen. And then I guilt myself into, telling myself, well, I should have been able to do that. I should have been able to, do all these things. Like we guilt ourselves and gaslight ourselves into thinking we're like these superhumans that don't require rest. And I do think some of that has been conditioned to believe that rest isn't productive. And, outward, we look at other people and like, my gosh, this person can do everything and they never take a break and they, which isn't true. We just don't see that. But also in my work life, there were things where yes, if I had known this sooner, I think could have intervened. And one was really setting boundaries with my time. So my time that I wasn't at work, I was still getting text and emails and phone calls about work. So there really was like no off switch. And again, I'm thinking, just being a great employee. And it's easier to answer that question right now than have to deal with it later. But I didn't realize was now I'm becoming just openly available to anyone and everyone. And this was, support staff would text me with a question about their pet on some random, so it was, the lines got very blurred. So I would say if you are having trouble and you're experiencing that, where you're like, I can just never turn off like that, there's very few things, even in healthcare, that can't wait. And I knew if it was a day off, but we were open, that there was someone there that could handle that anyway. Like I don't have to necessarily be that go-to person. Recognizing where your work starts and stops and where your personal life starts, I think is a huge first step for anyone that's questioning, am I in burnout or going down that road?
So how would somebody determine where that line is? Where do I draw that line? I'm sure it's very personal and unique to any position and work expectations and a person's um, comfort zones. Everybody's going to be a little different, I presume. So how do I set boundaries compared to how do you set boundaries compared to the person that's listening to this right now? Like, where is that line when I take a text, where I stay later than I should, where I'm having breakfast, lunch, dinner, and thinking about sleeping at work? Like, where is that point where you say, like, here is the line? And is that line consistent? Is it always like hard stop, or is there any sort of like wiggle room?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, yes, every position is going to be a little bit different, but I would say to the listener, if you are getting those texts and emails and calls outside of work, and your first thought is like maybe a little bit of anger or resentment that you are even getting contacted, that is like red flag that needs to be dealt with, because that doesn't go away. Things just worsen. And we teach people how to treat us. And so I see it all the time where, and I did this, we get upset that, someone reached out on our day off, but we've never set the boundary or told this person like, hey, I got your text yesterday. I apologize. It was my day off. That's a personal thing for me that I don't answer texts, outside of work or whatever. Definitely every job is different, but it's going to look like a gray area until you define it. And people will say, well, they need to be able to reach me. I'm like, well, I think of it this way. I, had cases potentially at times that were, a question of life or death. And I still was able to draw those boundaries, because even if I'm not at work, there's only so much I can do via text or phone call anyway. So setting those boundaries for support staff and colleagues and coworkers definitely looks a little bit different. And the other thing I want to talk about is that most people that don't have boundaries will say, I can't do that. And I'll ask them, okay, why? Like, what comes up for you? They're like, well, my boss. I'm like, hold on. These are all external, like what other people are thinking or feeling, which we don't even know that. So in essence, they've cut off even some sort of opportunity to stop burnout by our own limiting beliefs of what we think is possible. And so to the listener that's saying, well, yeah, everyone else can, but I can't, that's exactly why you should.
All the more reason.
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. I think back to my background. I've done 30 years in human healthcare and just veterinary medicine, and also many other careers that are um, have this sense of urgency to to
Mhm.
situations. There's people are in distress or the situation's under distress. It is easy to feel like there's always more to do. There's always something that can be solved. There's always, it doesn't end. There's this pleasure that we feel, I think, when we can answer the question, because it was like there was a problem. I said that I gave an answer, or I provided my services for 30 minutes and I did the job. That was cool. I can kind of put a bow on that and it's done, not recognizing that it's drinking from a fire hose. This is just there's always going to be more, and there's always the potential for another text or another call or another situation, or can I just get you 5 minutes before you stop for lunch. Is always, this thing could go on forever. So I always think of it as being aware that that is, depending upon your job or your career, that is the norm, and that could always happen. And you could even look at it as like cleaning the house. I mean, you could never
Mhm.
you could clean your house forever and never stop, because there's always like particles in the air and dust and stuff. But with that, I've both in my career, and my wife is an orthopedic veterinary surgeon, so some of my network are with other vets and surgeons and whatnot. And it seems like there's people are in certain, let's say, camps or certain buckets or personalities, and some are the 24/7, always available, always working, always on, always doing everything. And that seems to be, I think there's some pride in that, almost like there's like, oh, I'm
Mhm.
tough and I just kind of grind through it and never stop. And yet I also personally know several successful people in these type of positions who take a lunch every single day, leave the clinic, they're out the door by 5, and it's like, wait a minute, I didn't think this was possible. Like everybody else is like, no, it has to be like drinking from a fire hose. And yet there are people out there who have, maybe they're wired in a certain way, or maybe they've been on the precipice and learned how to set the boundaries and say, here's the deal. Here's when I answer my phone, here's when I don't. And so it's nice to have role models out there and realize that the world still goes around, even though some people in very high demand, high stress positions see the clock turn to 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whatever, and they leave. So it's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I was both those camps that you described. I was coming out of school, I was that, yeah, this equals my productivity and efficiency and 24/7 and always going now. It was funny because we hired a doctor. I was probably about 5 or 6 years into practice, who's phenomenal, love her to death, amazing doctor. And I remember her putting some boundaries in place around certain clients that maybe weren't that great with her, that didn't like her, or also putting boundaries around her time. And I remember thinking, God, like you're just not, you're not a team player, or you're not really into this. And I am completely the other end of that now, and think like, wow, she was ahead of her time in a way
Mm-hmm.
that, I mean, she's still in private practice and she's still practicing. So I think there's something to be said. There's something to be said for that. And there's a fine balance and some give and take that I think we have to kind of learn a little bit as we go and what works for us.
It seems like it'd be interesting to frame up what people think about for their careers in terms of the duration of their career. And if I want to be in this career or this job for 30 years, 40 years, like I want to, this is what I do. So I'm always going to be a veterinarian or a therapist or an accountant or whatever it is. Then how do I pace myself? How do I make this sustainable? And there's a little side note. I'm a exercise kind of guy and an endurance athlete by passion and probably by wiring. And I can recognize very well that if I'm going to get from point A to point B and a point B is way over there, I have to pace myself to get there.
Right.
And if you're gonna, for me, if I'm gonna ride my bike for 100 miles, if I go breakneck speed for the first 5 miles, it is going to be an awful 95 miles to go, and I'm not even, probably not even going to get there. And I think that sometimes careers are, the way people approach their jobs day to day is, it's the sprint, it's the high intense, the grand finale right now. But if you have the conversation with them, so what are you going to be doing in 5 or 10 years? It's like, well, this is what I do. I'm the vet, I'm the tech, I'm the accountant, I'm the whatever this career is. And at the same time, them clearly expressing, oh man, just like, this is brutal, this is super hard. It's like, it's not compatible. The equation doesn't look like it works right. And so how do you, like, what are some tools or tips you can help with somebody, say, like, how do we how do you frame that in a way that, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it's for so many people, it's certainly by the time they probably reach out for help, like they're in a sense of distress and can recognize this is not going to work for the long term. I'm kind of tapped out. So what, like, can they reframe that, step back and say, let me tidy this up? How do they do that? What are some tools?
Yeah, and that's a great analogy. It's really, we're not really taught, I think, in any profession how to sustain our career, right? Like you said, we go to school, become lawyer, vet, accountant, whatever, and then they're just kind of pushed out the door, like, all right, have fun. And so what I have found is that the qualities that got us to where we are not the same qualities that will sustain us. So the high achieving perfectionists that like to make sure everyone around them is happy, they have no boundaries, like that'll get you far, but it won't sustain you in that career. So anyone, and we're never really taught that. So then we get in the career and we're still going 100 miles an hour and we wonder why we hit a wall. And then we think, okay, this is like, is this how it's supposed to be? So we just kind of push it to the side and don't really give it any thought because we think this is normal. Like I know I did. It's like, oh, it's being an adult. You always heard, your parents like work's stressful. It's not going to be great. That was just kind of the idea. So I think for anyone that if you're getting those feelings of like going to work and you're feeling dread or there's a certain aspect of your job that you really dislike, I think taking a step back and looking at the why of that, because it doesn't feel like it in the moment, but a lot of times those things that you really dread that are challenging, there's a different way to approach that so that it is more sustainable. And I know for like some people in veterinary medicine really don't enjoy the client facing aspect of it because it can be very emotionally draining. And I always think like, okay, well, let's look at it in a way of how can I not feel like I'm giving my all in every single exam room that I go into? And there's ways around that. But what happens is that we think if we don't give our all, that equals failure and we're not good at our job. And so it's that little voice in our head that keeps pushing us forward to not quote unquote fail. So I really look at those things that are a pain point for you in your job and look at what is this something that does it have to be as bad as it feels? And why is that? I think that's a great first step.
Yeah, being reflective is challenging, and again, I
Mm-hmm.
think especially when we are probably wired a certain way. We're drawn to this, career perhaps in a certain way, and so then the career maybe pours gasoline on a situation that it can, exaggerate things that maybe served us well at a certain point in life, but it's a disservice for that. For the marathon, for the century, for for the long, long career, like it's just not going to be compatible. But I think this may be a good kind of slight pivot here to talk about our identity. And I think that especially as we to start, this is a long time ago for me at least, once upon a time you're in school and you're a student and you're pushing and you're pushing and you're trying to get the grades so you can get into the program you want, you get into the program you want and like it's really hard. So you got to push and push and push. And then you graduate from the program and again, this could be for any career, or any profession, anything anybody's doing. But you push and push, and you're trying to learn how to master things. You got to kind of prove yourself when you're first out of the gate. So then it's like, yeah, I will take the extra shift. I will double down. I will work twice as hard. And it's not hard, and this may be hard for a younger person to understand, but 5 or 6 years goes by in a snap, and you may still
Mm-hmm.
have your head down, and you're still like, this is the thing I'm doing. This is the way it's supposed to be. And that's, you alluded to this as well. Like, this is how what it's supposed to be, and I just need to toughen up. But where in there is your professional identity in relation to your personal identity? Are those two separate things, and how do they reconcile, or can they reconcile?
Yeah, they absolutely blend. I know they did for myself because most of your time is awake time is spent on work. And so what's very interesting is that because it starts to blend together, I think then we also feel as though if I don't take that extra shift, if I don't come in early, then I'm a failure, but I'm a failure like as a person because now I've looked at that as my identity of anyone in any field you get family members like everyone knows like talk to my parents like oh her daughter's a vet, her daughter's a lawyer, and so that does become you. And so it is something where, to add fuel to the fire, is we look at our outcomes and our accomplishments as proof that we're worthy and that we should be doing this job, and this job is who we are. And so it's just kind of a snowball effect, because now we're doing less things in our personal life. I mean, I was joking the other day. I'm like, I stopped asking high achievers if they had a hobby, because a lot of them didn't. It was work was their hobby. And so I'm like, that needs to change, and they almost become very, like, this is who I am, and almost like a little angry if you say that this is something that you do and this is a part of you, but it's not all of you. And so it really does, we make it mean something about us as a human. And so it gets very difficult to find that definition between, Amber outside of work and Amber as a veterinarian. And I see that a lot.
So do you feel like this is part of the maybe anti-burnout, or a tool to kind of work on, is to understand or to develop something outside of, who are you, and tell me who you are without telling me what you do for work, like who you
Yeah.
are. Like if that's completely stumped somebody and they don't really have much to say, like, hey, maybe let's talk about developing this other side, like the real you, in essence. Like how do you do that, and how much of that should we have, maybe, especially for people who love their career, like, I love what I do and this is fun. So it's hard for me not to say, oh, nice to meet you. This is what I do, and be
Right.
excited about it. How do we reconcile that? I feel like, and I don't know the answer. It's kind of like I'm not even sure how to, like, the concise way to ask the question, but how do we reconcile those differences? Or is
Yeah.
there a difference?
Yeah, I think it's different for everyone, for sure. And I think part of that is, I mean, number one is like boundaries.
Mm.
That'll be like the first step. And I think we have to remember that society has kind of told us that really we should be living, breathing our work. Like, and that means we're a status really of where we are in the hierarchy, if you will. And so if we don't identify with that, we sometimes feel like we're just flapping in the breeze. We really don't know. So I think what's interesting, I heard this somewhere a long time ago, and I think there's a lot of truth to it. Like, look at what you did when you were a kid. What did you enjoy doing as a child? And for some people, it's like painting or riding a bike, or, and so going back to some of that, it seems very simple, but there was probably some underlying feeling of joy that you had before we layered everything else on top. And I think and you'll probably recognize this as well, even veterinarians or anyone in the veterinary field, they enjoy animals. So that's also their hobby.
Hmm.
Like maybe they show dogs or they ride horses. And so that can blur the lines. Same thing with, fitness. Like that's something they enjoy, but there's definitely boundaries there. And so I don't know if anything is well defined. I think that's going to look different for everyone, because I think some people really need two separate, like, this is my work thing and this is my non-work thing. And it makes it easier for other people to know what bucket to put them in, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of like that concept of work-life balance. I have mixed feelings about that, like the concept of that, like to totally compartmentalize. And maybe this is like the gray area of, I want to make sure I take care of myself. And that means, I want to enjoy my career, but I do some things on the side. Maybe the way you look at it, maybe my work is what's on the side and this is who I am as a person. I don't know, like chicken or the egg, but to figure out, is there, and I'm sure everybody's different. Is there a specific, here's my work, hard stop, here's my life or outside work life, and there's a hard stop and a hard beginning, versus being okay at times to have an unsustainable effort in one of those either one of those. And on the one hand, it's probably easy for us to think, not everybody, but hopefully for most of us, we could say a long weekend, or a vacation, the clinic is closed, or whatever it is, where it's like, okay, this is a well-defined, and with my family, I'm on vacation, I can't, I'm unreachable for a couple of days. That's a nice way to kind of, put a fence around, this is my personal time. And then, when you're in the clinic or in the office or out in the field, whatever you're doing, like, that's a defined work time. And yet, and I say this, and I feel like I've kind of picked this up after being an entrepreneur for a long time, that work-life balance, I sometimes look at things as seasons, almost like kind of a little bit
Yes.
of a broader stroke. and saying, hey, I've got to, think in terms of like maybe projects. And I apologize for anybody who's listening who's doing like the 9 to 5, really like a strict schedule. This may be a little bit unusual to think about, but as an entrepreneur, there's no true beginning or end to my day. There's no real signal. I can sit in bed at night and work on my computer. I can, wonder what day of the week it is. And as long as there's Wi-Fi, or even just in my mind, I could be
Right.
hiking in the backwoods and it's like I still got ideas. The voices in my head don't ever stop. But also being okay that maybe without getting to the point of burnout, maybe there is a period where, hey, I'm covering shifts for a week, I'm on call, or I've got this. It's a busy time of year. It's, there's a seasonality to it. Perhaps is there a way to say this is okay in this situation without crossing that burnout overwhelm phase?
Yeah, I was going to say that. I love that term. I think there's different seasons of that balance. And there are some that you could even say it's in like the masculine or feminine energies. So masculine, you're very hustle and go, go, go. And maybe you're feminine, you're a little more laid back and there's a little more flow there. And nothing to do with gender, just more like your
Yeah.
energy and how you show up. And so, yeah, I think that, it's life. Like nothing is perfect and nothing really goes as planned. So I think seasons are okay. I think the biggest distinguishing factor is, are you purposefully making that season be that way because of what, like maybe there's an outcome that you're looking for. You're looking to get some other specialization or certification, or you're looking to make some extra money for a down payment on a house. Like have it very purposeful, because sometimes what I find is they'll say, well, I'm just, I'm stressed out and I'm burnt out, but I have a vacation in a couple weeks, or I know someone's coming back from maternity leave. And so we won't, the workload will be less. And so to that, I say, those again are all external factors. And if we're just kind of like riding the wave and we don't know what's going to come, that's really what sets us up to not have those parameters. So I think that you have to do it with purpose, and there has to be either like there's intention there, whether that's an outcome or a certain end result that you're looking for.
Yeah, you said the word intention. That's exactly the word I'm like kind of summarizing that in my mind. Even
Yeah.
the intention is there can be with intention. I feel like there's less, right or wrong. I don't know if even right or wrong is the right way to say it, but it's like, no, I know what I'm doing. I know I'm working more hours today than I would want to, but I'm eyes wide open. I'm doing the thing. And I think about this with part of my coaching is I do exercise, nutrition, and sleep, and there are life is chaotic, right? I can put it on a spreadsheet and it looks good for some sort of like lab experiment or something like that, but it's not how the real world works. When they start working with me, sometimes it's, oh, but I'm afraid that you're going to tell me I can't have dessert, and I'm like, oh, no, have dessert. To be clear, like, yes, have dessert, do it with intention, don't get cheap dessert, make it so delicious and amazing,
Right.
like it's like this is awesome, and embrace it and feel no guilt because you're being mindful, and just by like framing that thing, in this case maybe somewhat relatable example for those of us that like dessert now and then, to have that in front of us and say, I know what I'm doing it on purpose. There's a reason for it. And if it's joy for right now, or, to go with the dessert example, if it's, it's Thanksgiving or I'm with family and friends and it's date night or whatever it is, it's like, heck yes, I'm going to do this thing because it fits just right. Or I'm going to work more hours because I'm trying to save up some money to pay off my credit card or to put a down payment on a house. It's intention. Like I'm
Yeah.
doing this. Do you feel like that would help maybe be a buffer to burnout? Like if you're kind of being thoughtful about that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that high achievers and a lot of people are really good at moving the goal line, that finish line, and we get close and we're like, wow, we practically did it. So we can do a little bit more.
One more month.
That's yes. That is the difference. I've done it myself. I see it in my clients. I think what happens is we get so focused on the outcome that we miss the journey to get there and we forget that intention. It has to be, the awareness has to be there of, what is the end result and what am I going to do after that? Once I get to that point, what is my next step? Because ultimately, sometimes we'll just keep pushing that finish line a little bit further down the road until we end up burnt out because there is no end and there is no intention there. So we're kind of just going rogue essentially.
Yeah. And I think that's certainly with high achievers, and certainly with high achievers, but I feel like there's also people who have a challenge being really reflective on like why am I doing the thing, and it's this is what I'm supposed to do, and this is I graduate, I'm following in this sort of like well-worn path of put your head down, and depending upon our generation, I mean, my parents, it was you start working. Well, my parents is you start working at one place and you work there until you die.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that is like the concept of changing jobs, which now has been like it's a hobby for people to hop around with
Right.
different
Yeah.
jobs. It's all different, but it's interesting to kind of like try to frame it up in a way of purpose and intention. And I think that to throw in what I always feel like is the process, like embracing, like I recognize that this is who I am, this is how I'm wired, and maybe coming up against some sort of friction is maybe it's almost like the subconscious goal. And maybe I'm sort of like this is my therapy session a little bit, but
Yeah.
I mean, I also took a pivot in my career. I was working in hospitals and clinics and stuff, and I said I just can't take it anymore. This isn't the place I want to be in, and I was either going to quit therapy altogether or I was going to start my own practice. So started my own practice, whole different set of problems and challenges. In essence, it was just a different set of challenges, ones that I maybe enjoyed facing a little bit more, had felt like I had more control. But the ultimate gut feeling of stress and overwhelm and the work never ends was actually the same. I mean, so it was like you're
Yeah.
really just kind of making this tiny, almost like superficial level change when really like kind of like the deep down part of it was this is just who I am. And so now it's taking the time to reflect, take pause, and my habit is journaling. I got to write down
Yeah.
stuff in a sense just to kind of look back and say, here I am, like I'm doing my thing again. Let me kind of step back and recognize that this is just part of the journey. It's another day. Where do I draw the line? There's nothing, if I don't do something for this afternoon, nobody's going to die. There's not like,
Right.
life's on the line. So I can kind of take pause. But I think that's really hard if we are
Mhm.
wired a certain way. And so it's maybe the awareness of it is as powerful as any like tool in a toolbox, perhaps for me anyhow. But
Yeah.
yeah, but I'll digress with that. So let's kind of wrap up a little bit here and just maybe kind of throw in a little bit about how I feel like the concept of self-care or maybe even neglecting our own needs is also kind of a telltale sign that maybe things are going over the edge a little bit. Do you find that in your
Yeah.
clients?
I do. It's funny. I'll get some that will come to me and they're like, "I know I need more self-care and I'm going to start going to yoga." And I'm like, "Hold on. You're just adding more things to your plate. That's not going to help. Let's look at again doing maybe yoga from a place of intention and want and like instead of feeling like it's another thing we check off." So self care, I use it as like a buzzword because it kind of, I think it means different things to different people. Self care could be doing your taxes, like things that
Mhm.
you have to do that you'll feel better when it's done type of thing. So I do think that having some sort of line of really where that is. And I think too for people to recognize it's not about just getting to the end result. It's just the process of getting there, which isn't really how society delivers that piece of information to us. So the other thing that I wanted to mention that does not, this is very much subconscious. You're talking about subconscious and below kind of our awareness is that a lot of the things that we do, so maybe overcommitting to things, whether that's at work or not, people pleasing, making sure other people's emotions are managed and doing everything perfection, like really when that comes down, to the very core, there has the potential there of some feeling of a lack of self worth or low self esteem because we're looking externally for all that validation. And what's really messed up is we get it because we help people. Oh, you're so helpful. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. We do yeah, we do things perfectly. Oh my gosh, that was so great. And so what we don't realize is it's positively reinforcing those behaviors essentially. We can't look at it as just another box to check because if you're like me, you'll have a to-do list and you'll do three things and you'll add two more. And if
Mhm.
you're listening and you're doing that, that's not normal. And so, yeah, it's learning the time boundaries, but also if you are, if it feels uncomfortable to check things off that list and not add things, that's what we have to really dig into. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's so important point, and it's hard and hard for those of us that are driven, and it's like to add things to a list is easy, and it's almost sometimes I don't know, this may be a little bit of a sideways way to look at it, but sometimes it's actually kind of a lazy cop out. I'm going to add a
Yeah.
bunch of little tiny, like I get this big long list of stuff to do, and it's easy to do like, oh, go grocery shopping, no, do laundry, I'll do this little tiny, oh, answer some emails. When ultimately there's like a big, like the one major thing that I need to do that really is going to impact my life, but it's more effortful and
Right.
maybe it's a little bit more emotionally challenging for me to kind of get to that space. So I'm just gonna be like, oh, I'm super busy. Oh, oh, somebody just called. I gotta go do the thing. And
Yeah.
and so I get it, and I've certainly I can say this because I struggle with all of that stuff. Again, I've been in healthcare for 30 years, so codependency and helping people pleasing is my jam. but
Yep. Yep.
but also there are sometimes like being that overcommitted is actually kind of is I look at it as being a little bit. I mean, it can be self defeating, and it's a little bit easier than saying no, which is I think that when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to like those boundaries, like saying no, no, you don't need to focus on like which yoga class to go on. Perhaps look at the chaos of your life and take one thing out of it, and
Yes. Yeah.
that's the exercise of the day. No, don't fill that 15-minute slot up with a class or half hour slot up with a class. Like just leave it empty, and that's for many of us that is more nerve wracking than I should be
Yeah.
doing something else. And maybe I can fit in two things real quick and on my way to this thing.
Yeah. And that chaos, I like when we're in that fight or flight for so long, our mind and body will look to fill those holes. So that's the other thing is that we take something off the list. And I mean, I had a client tell me not that long ago, she said, the thought of slowing down feels so uncomfortable. And that's what I tell people. Like, you can change jobs and professions. If it's like how our brain is wired, like when I went into relief work, I had a lot more time. I was doing some crazy ambitious gym routine, working a 14-hour overnight shift and then going to the gym, which was awful, and home renovate, so like it's getting down to the core of why we do that is where that change happens. Yeah.
That's deep. Well, Amber, let's help our listeners with what I like to wrap up every episode with, and that is saying if there was one thing that somebody could do today to extend their health span, specifically their emotional well being around the burnout work thing, what is one thing you think somebody could benefit from doing or learning?
Yes, I think it sounds simple, but in those moments of feeling very overwhelmed, stressed, you feel like frustrated, the biggest thing you can ask yourself is what is in my control right now? And the things that often aren't in our control, is my boss going to like the project that I did? Is that person going to respond to my email? Like we worry about them. And I get that. That's a whole nother topic, but we don't have control over them. So when we can shift that energy towards what do I have control over? Like maybe getting out of work on time or going for that run, and putting energy towards the things we want will start to kind of have those changes. And absolutely, less stress is going to have such positive health benefits too.
100%. It sounds like the voice of experience, Amber.
Yep. And still try to go down that road. So I got to pull myself back. Yeah.
Yes, we do need to take our own medicine. Well, Dr. Amber Parks, she is a vet turned burnout and stress coach. I will have all of your contact information on both this YouTube version of this podcast and on the other platforms where people listen to it. I'm super grateful for the time. Great conversation. The struggle for me was trying to say, oh, if I could go down that path, I could go down this path.
Yeah.
So like the maybe it just highlights how important and really the keystone of our emotional well-being truly is in our health, and specifically for those of us that are ambitious people and like to maybe add more things to the list and are uncomfortable taking things away from the list, is there are health consequences if we're not careful with that, like literal.
Yeah.
And, the cliche of people having heart attacks from that's stress related, and it does sound a little bit cliche, but it's also very scientifically, physiologically sound. These things that were happening when we're under chronic stress has a direct impact on our health span and our lifespan. So take some tips from this episode, and if you have any more questions, reach out to Dr. Amber Parks. I'm sure she'll be able to help you out. And thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah. Reach out to me, send me a DM on social media, hop on my website, and yeah, we'll get talking. I can help you out.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks. Bye.